Hello and welcome to GreenFleet Talks. My name is Kate Armitage and I'm your host for our discussion today. I am delighted to be joined once again by Lee Brown, Head of Ozone and Managing Director of Interactive Fleet Management at the Grosvenor Group. Hello Lee.
Good afternoon, Kate. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. Today, Lee and I are discussing the growth of electric vehicles and what more needs to happen in the transition to mass market. So kicking off, Lee, the latest figures from the SMMT show that battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles reached 17% of the market in July for new vehicle registrations. Which is great news, and I didn't expect that we'd be where we are quite so soon. So what would you say are the main reasons that EV sales have picked up so dramatically?
Well, firstly, I think it'd be interesting to see how the figures would have been if we could get cars delivered, Kate, actually. Yeah, you know, I think it would have been nice to see it even higher. I would say there's so many factors that are contributing to this. Obviously deliveries of EVs and ultra low emission vehicles is snowballing, which is great to see. I think the infrastructure is improving. You've got more manufacturers introducing more models. The ranges are getting better. We're seeing pricing come down, surprisingly as well. I mean, I think there was perhaps a bit of uproar when the government reduced the grants, but what we've seen is actually manufacturers, coming to the party and reducing their prices in some cases as well, which is had like a double benefit to the consumers, drivers or companies, whatever, because they've dropped their prices, the vehicles have still qualified for the grants, and it's win-win. So there's been some positive movement in the pricing as well. Of course, benefit in kind tax savings is always very appealing to drivers. I guess what the HMRC the government have done is they've made the choice of a petrol or diesel vehicle very expensive, or certainly comparatively expensive, still possibly cheaper than sourcing a brand new car yourself, but certainly compared to an electric or a plug-in hybrid vehicle, the combustion engine vehicle is very expensive. So there's an awful lot of factors that are contributing to this. I think schemes such as salary sacrifice, obviously we have one here and it's gathering momentum and we're getting more and more interest on a daily basis. But again, it certainly helps with ultra low emission vehicle registrations, because of course it's certainly the cheapest way to get an electric vehicle. So again, there's lots of incentives and savings available for certainly electric vehicles. I think we're also seeing, as a consequence, I guess, of the incentives, we're seeing more and more companies now changing their car policies. Particularly in the Ozone team, we spend an awful lot of our time now working with customers and prospects as well now, to help them sort of green up their car policy, move to whole life cost mechanisms and give careful thought to things like fuel calculations and mileage parameters and so on. So we're seeing more and more companies now introducing ultra low and electric vehicles, and of course reduce mileage as well. I think people are still doing less miles. I absolutely believe there's more and more cars on the road again. I'm not sure whether we're back up to sort of pre-pandemic levels, but me, myself, and lots of my colleagues here, we're still having a lot of Zoom meetings that we'd have previously had face to face. So again, it all sort of facilitates the move to full electric vehicles.
That range anxiety thing has become maybe less of an issue, and I think it's almost a bit of a snowball effect, isn't it? And that you see more and more of these vehicles on the road, and I'm loving the green number plates because you can't. Yeah. It makes it so much easier to spot them. So I love it. But it's building confidence, isn't it? You know, that
Yeah.
non-EV drivers are seeing all of these and thinking, oh, well, maybe it's not as niche as I thought it was.
Yeah, and you get that with new technology. I mean, it's your classic product life cycle as well, isn't it? I mean, you know, we all remember smartphones. I remember smartphones when they first came out, and I know I've probably used this analogy before, but you know, some of my friends were getting rid of their phones with keys and buttons and getting these new touchscreen things, and you know, I was like, oh no, no, it's not for me, not for me. But obviously, you know, sure as you know, a few months, years later, you know, I get my smartphone, and it's you kind of embrace it. So once you kind of see people living with it, and there's more and more of them, you know, and you gain confidence in the product, you know, the market matures, and you see growth. And it's the same with electric vehicles. You know, thankfully we're not seeing them all broken down at the side of the road, and you know, people see them in their, you know, on the neighbours' drives and the work car park. I mean, you know, every 10th car is a Tesla Model 3, it feels, or you
Yeah,
know,
it does feel
ID3.
like
You know,
that.
there's some, you know, there's some really good electric vehicles and on the road. You know, there's more and more of them. So
Yeah.
you know, absolutely, we're seeing, like you say, that snowball effect.
Confidence. So, okay, so let's flip the conversation then, because we're talking about 17% market share in July, which of course means that 83% of vehicles are still ICE.
Mm-hmm.
So, why do you think businesses are still choosing an ICE vehicle over an EV?
Okay, so within the ozone team, you know, obviously, you know, our main concern is, you know, to you know, advise our customers to the best of our ability. You know, the last thing we want is, you know, for us to, you know, push them into greener policies. You know, perhaps naively say, right, you need to get all your drivers into electric vehicles, because you know, there's instances, you know, in perhaps rural areas, and for, you know, for real job need drivers where, you know, they're doing, you know, 20-30,000 miles a year with a lot of equipment. They need to be able to respond quickly to you know, their job needs. So, you know, in not all circumstances is you know, the customers feel that, you know, a switch to an EV is the right thing to do. So I think there's perhaps, you know, perhaps undue cautiousness. I think, you know, we see, you know, companies thinking, well, we've got lots of, you know, lots of our drivers don't have off-road parking, you know, therefore they can't have electric vehicles. Well, that's not necessarily true, because, you know, you public charging, you know, the more public charging points being installed, but there's certainly, from an operational perspective, a reluctance to make the transition to full electric vehicles, and it's, you know, there's not always the you know, I'm not sure we've got the models and availability yet. You know, there's not a huge amount of, you know, standard estate cars. You know, I think there's an MG estate, but other than that, you're looking at things like the Skoda Enyaq, and you know, you've got your iX3 and Q4, you know, which have reasonable, you know, boot spaces, but again, they're quite expensive compared to like a, you know, a box standard Ford Focus estate. So you know, there is absolutely still like an operational reluctance, I guess. Yeah.
And I think you hit the nail on the head as well around affordability. So if you're
Yeah.
looking at total cost of ownership, an electric vehicle works on paper for people who are looking to drive not necessarily a prestige vehicle, but maybe a mid grade vehicle
with a good range as well.
Yeah, yeah, but maybe you know, it feels like we're still lacking the kind of really affordable family car size.
Yeah. I mean, the Skoda Enyaq, you know, you got the VWID4, which is the other one I was thinking of that got stuck somewhere between my mouth and my brain and my mouth. But yeah, there's, you know, I guess there are some more, you know, some more affordable vehicles, but again, you know, certainly in the lower grades, which is where you tend to find you know, your real job need drivers that are doing the high mileage with a lot of tools, you know, and for them to make a transition into an electric vehicle, you know, not only do they need the space, you know, like I said, they need, you know, they need a good range, and you know, particularly in winter months where, you know, you've got the lights and heating on, and the range is reduced, you know, companies and employers, you know, have to, you know, they have to be seen to making sure that their drivers have got a, you know, a car that's fit for purpose, and you know, they're not, yeah, perhaps, you know, forcing these vehicles onto them when it could result in them, you know, being stuck on the side of the road, or not being able to fulfill their job requirements.
And when you're really talking about mass market, the focus really is much more on affordability. I think
Yeah.
over the next 5 years, that's going to become a really important focus for this market. Certainly, as we move towards 2030, when we know you won't be able to buy a new petrol or diesel.
Yeah.
So okay, so in conversations that we've had. Lee, we focus a lot on the electric vehicle itself and the choice of vehicles, and similarly, people are quite focused on the recharging equipment and the hardware. But what else do businesses need to consider before they switch to EV?
Well, I guess it requires a, you know, perhaps a change in sort of culture, and you know, certainly from an administration perspective as well, because it's, you know, it's not quite as straightforward as, you know, I take fuel for example. You know, we've all, you know, become very comfortable with, you know, fuel cards and paying for business mileage under the advisory fuel rates or approved mileage allowance payments, and so on. So you know, I think, you know, changes, you know, particularly in the fuel policy, organisations perhaps don't necessarily expect certain, you know, certain challenges that come with EVs. You know, the 4 pence per mile advisory electricity rate is sufficient for people charging at work and for charging at home that can, you know, take advantage of lower energy tariffs. But particularly for your high mileage drivers that are having to charge out on the road using, you know, expensive public charge stations, you know, particularly the rapid chargers where you're paying, you know, 3 times what you'd pay at home. You know, typically you pay about 15p per kilowatt hour at home. You know, some of the public rapid charge points, you're paying 45, 50p per kilowatt hour. So, you know, what that in turn creates is perhaps drivers that, you know, turn around, well, saying, hang on a second, you know, I've had to, you know, I've paid, you know, 30 quid for you know, electricity this week, but, you know, you're only reimbursing me 15 because they're using 4 pence per mile. So, you know, I think there's operational challenges. You know, I think as well, you know, perhaps we've certainly seen companies that, you know, have perhaps underestimated, you know, the amount of support and education and training their drivers need to actually run electric vehicles as well. I mean, it's, again, you know, back to, you know, charging and the time that it takes and journey planning. You know, I've certainly seen it, you know, issues with drivers that have, you know, taken an electric vehicle, thought, oh great, I'm going to save £200-300 a month in tax, and, you know, I can fuel it for 4 pence per mile. But what they perhaps don't realise is that, you know, you can no longer go on a 300-mile round trip without planning it correctly and making sure you know where your rapid chargers are, and, you know, the different charging types, different connections, and also, you know, to make sure that you've got a plan B as well, because, you know, as I'm sure you're aware, Kate, you know, sometimes these charge points don't always work as you'd like. You know, you might have to find, you know, quickly download apps for another energy provider. So yeah, there's a, yeah, it's all well and good, and, you know, we've seen it for many months now, the benefit, you know, drivers enjoying the savings in tax, and companies as well. You know, there's obviously savings in Class 1A national insurance and fuel for the employer as well. But it's certainly, there's a lot more, you know, to think about than just the savings.
Yeah, and it's definitely a behaviour change that the
Yeah,
employees need to be prepared for. They need that education because none of this is difficult, but you can get caught out if you're a bit too blasé about where and how you're going to refuel the vehicle. So if you've
yeah.
thought about that up front, it gets easier. It's yeah, and your point about how much you pay for the electricity. I mean, it's not something that is in the front of people's minds. You know, when you're watching the TV or running the washing machine, you're not thinking about how much is this costing.
No.
But there are such wide variations for public charging an electric vehicle versus home electricity. You do
Yeah.
need to have a little bit of awareness of
Yeah, and I think
what's
it's a
going
bit
on.
of flexibility as well for the employer because, so you can obviously, there's public charge points that are free of charge and you can get 50 kilowatt free public charge points, which is great for the people that have access to them. But there will absolutely be, some drivers, particularly those that are doing high mileage, that have to use the rapid chargers because they don't have
Yeah.
time to sit, for several hours at a 7 or 11 kilowatt charger. So I guess, companies, if you can't go blindly into it thinking that's fine, yeah, it's 4 pence per mile, and that's what we'll pay our employees, because there will be certain employees that just can't run their car for 4 pence per mile. So it's just having that flexibility to say, actually, yeah, you're right, you shouldn't be out of pocket, and have some mechanism to reimburse them.
So Lee, so we talk a lot about what businesses need to do to reduce vehicle emissions in their fleet. But what role do you think local authorities need to take to maximise the EV uptake in their areas?
Uh, yeah, I guess there's there's a huge disparity between local councils and their strategies and what they're doing. Obviously, they're different councils have completely different areas, geographical areas that fall under their remit. Some are hugely rural, some are hugely urban. So I can completely understand why they have different strategies. I can imagine that most councils across the UK have got slightly different strategies to one another. So, it's a complex area because, the question you ask yourself, I suppose, is, do you know how many charge points are going to be installed in your area in the next 2 years? I suspect most people would probably say no. But I guess what's more alarming for me is that I don't even know where to go to find this information. So I would like to see perhaps, the information made more easily and publicly available rather than have to sift through, your local government website to find out what their strategy and infrastructure plans are. So, I think it should be more publicly available. Um, and I'd like, I mean, obviously, I'd like to see the infrastructure continue to improve and more charge points. I know that there's rules and legislation now around new developments, and the number of charge points that there has to be for the number of parking bays, number of houses, and so on. So. I would like to. I just think that we need to see more communication and more information so that for people that are considering an electric vehicle, it's very easy to find out what their infrastructure is in their area, what the improvements are going to be over the next few years, because it would help sway more people into an electric vehicle that would perhaps otherwise think, do you know what, I'm not quite sure whether it's ready for me yet, so I'm going to go and order myself petrol, diesel, or even a plug-in hybrid vehicle. If you get them into full EVs, then obviously it's so much better.
I couldn't agree with you more, Lee. And it comes back to this whole point about building confidence and consumer
Yeah,
confidence. Seeing the EVs on the road is one thing, but having a really clear and well communicated local plan, which tells them where they can expect to be able to find public charging or what's required of them as a land or an employer, I think would be really helpful. So
I think another thing as well. Sorry, Kate. Another thing is, it's. I think the government needs to do something about, the number of apps you need now and number of accounts that you need. Obviously, there are providers out there where you can just rock up and use your contactless, debit card or whatever. But for me, I just think it needs a bit of regulation or something that can still enable you to have different accounts perhaps, but you really want it all sort of in one app, one program or something, because it's not easy, not easy to plan your journey as it is, but without the additional headache of having to set up more and more accounts. I've got I've almost got a screen now on my phone devoted to EVs and charging. So I would absolutely like to see the government do more to sort of counteract that a bit.
So I think I agree with you, and I similarly have multiple apps on my phone. OZEV has this year been consulting over the public charging experience. They are have been up until now reluctant to mandate something because they really want the market to decide. But it is, in a competitive market, it is becoming increasingly difficult for consumers to navigate their way around it. But I think there's quite a lot happening in that space. So I'm hopeful. It may not be overnight, but we will see improvements.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, thank you, Lee. As always, it has been a pleasure talking to you. That is about all we've got time for. Thank you to Grosvenor Leasing for joining GreenFleet Talks, and thank you for watching. Please tune in to GreenFleet 365 again soon.